So I'm going to take a short time just to begin with to tell you about our approach here at Homerton, some of the stories around improvement work we've been doing over the past 18 months. And then for those of you who work here, I'm going to do a little plug for what resources there are to support you. And then we'll move into the more interesting talks. So just to begin with, from my understanding, could you put your hand up if you've heard of the Model for Improvement? Yeah. The Model for Improvement. Sorry, Yorkshire accent. Okay, so a good number of people, but not everybody. So I don't think that's unusual when I start to speak to groups. I'm going to assume that because half of you know about it, I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm going to assume that those of you who are interested, there's enough resources out there for you to go and find out a bit about it. And I would recommend that you do. So does anybody recognise this chap on the screen? Hands up again if you do. So a few people, a few less. If I asked you if you thought he was Robert Francis, would you say yes? No, good, okay. So Robert Francis was a lawyer who gave us lots of recommendations after what was happening at Mid Staffordshire was blown out in the media. Gave us some really good tools to hold people to account when there are failings in services. But what we recognised is that there also needs to be something else to stop us getting to the stage where services are failing service users and citizens. So this is Don Berwick. He's a paediatrician and he's really interested particularly in the way that children learn. So they're really good at learning, children. So again, hands up, has anybody known a child who's tried to start walking, fallen over and hurt themselves and said, oh, that really hurt. Do you know what, this walking malarkey, not for me. I'm out. No, what do? They get up and try again, exactly, yeah. So they're really tenacious children. They just keep going till they get it right. And the other thing you notice about children is that they're really curious. So they want to understand things around them, and they go through all different phases of learning in different ways. One where they sort of put everything in their mouth and it's a bit disgusting. But those two things together make them really good at learning. The problem starts when we become adults and we can't sustain that level of curiosity and tenacity. So we develop lots of habits and things, which are really good and we need those, but we also need a way of breaking those and improving them. So the Model for Improvement gives us that as an organisation, and we've been trying to use that in some of our work over the last 18 months. So lots of organisations that are good at improvement, not just in healthcare, they try and recognise that you need a model, you need a framework to improve, but you also need to know what it is you're trying to do as an organisation. So at Homerton we've got our strategy Achieving Together, and you also need to understand how you expect to behave with each other as colleagues. So if I try an improvement and it fails, and nearly everybody in this room will try and improve it and it will fail, I need to feel safe that my colleagues aren't going to ridicule me, that they're going to say, oh, well, never mind, we've learnt something, let's try it again and see what we can get right next time. So there's, I think we try to do that at Homerton, have those three things working together. And very briefly, there's different levels of engagement in improvement. So some people have their whole job as improvement, so I'm one of those, and Harold at the back there, pop your hand up. One of our QI leads, he's one of those as well. We have to do lots of reporting on the work that we do because there's a huge investment in us. So it's right and proper that we have to demonstrate what we're doing. Most people, I would say here today, are in this middle category where you have to improve quality as one of a big long list of jobs that you've got. So you need things to be slick, quick, easy and straightforward. Sadly, improvement's none of those things. It's really messy and it takes a lot of time, but we do what we can to support with that. And most of our job is about enabling people like yourselves who work in the service to do this work, and we do that by trying to introduce you to the framework and give you some kind of tools and some guidance. So these are just a few stories about work we've done over the last 18 months. For those of you who were in Merrick's session this morning, he spoke about pressure ulcers. And did you see that lovely graph he had where there were lots of pressure ulcers and then suddenly it all came down and it went, and he was wondering what we did. Well, what we did was we introduced a pressure ulcer scrutiny committee. So quite an assurance-driven framework, but what that group did is they did a detailed piece of work about pressure ulcers. And they were able to influence things inside our hospital really well but what they weren't able to do is influence outside of our hospital. So we've done some work across Hackney around training people who don't work in healthcare to recognise the signs of pressure damage. And we've gone down to the detail of we had a tool and it said on it, do you recognise that the skin looks sore? Now for people who aren't used to that language, what we've had to change it to is, does the skin look red? That means something to somebody who's not a healthcare professional. So we're now training 500 residential care workers in how to recognise the early signs of pressure damage. And also with people who informally care for family members. So we're hoping that's going to have a big impact on community-acquired pressure ulcers, and we'll see fewer people coming into our hospital with those. We've done some work on falls. So for those of you who know Mari, our falls nurse, we're part of some networks, which is really valuable for us. There's two networks we're mainly part of, one based in London, so UCLP, and a national one called NHS Quest. And they're groups of trusts who are really committed to the thought that if we all try something, one thing each, and then we come together and share the learning, we can pinch ideas from each other and we'll get improvement much faster than we would otherwise. So we call that a collaborative. And you can see here some of our falls rates sort of coming down. That's the whole collaborative together's data. And we've been able to show quite a wicked problem falls. We're not really sure that there's a recipe for fixing it, but there's some things we can do to help. So improvement science for leaders. Anybody familiar with our IIT team? So this is our integrated independence team. So health and social care staff working in one team together to try and prevent people needing to come into hospital. They've just started a really targeted piece of work. And what they're wanting to do is make sure people get multidisciplinary interventions as early as possible. They're working with Quest on a course called Improvement Science for Leaders, and they've found it, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, really tricky to go through the discipline of the model for improvement. So it feels intuitive that you would start with the question, what are we trying to achieve? But in practice, practical people who are really operational usually start with a list of things they want to try. And you have to bring them back and say, well, yeah, we want to try all those things and they might be great, but what is it that will mean they've been successful when we try them? So they've spent a long time getting their aim right, which is why I've put it up here. For anyone who's been involved in that work, it'd be interesting to talk to you about it over a cup of coffee. And then you might recognise another face here. Sorry, Deblina. So really interesting to hear about the story with a comic book this morning. So somebody's experience of going through our services and having good clinical care in most cases, but the things that stuck in her mind were how people related to her, and she spoke to us afterwards about this real thing of showing empathy. So person-centred care is one area where we've offered some training this year. We had some pilots last year where we looked at all different ways of trying to go about breaking into this thing called person-centred care. And it's quite potentially a bit of a woolly thing, and potentially something that everybody believes they're doing really well. So we want to build on the good practice that we've got, but we sent a couple of people on a training course and they found it really impactful. So we've got more people going through that this year. And we're hoping to, again, build a little collaborative around that so people can share learning about how they've been able to change their services as a result of what they've learned. So they're just a couple of examples of kind of the high-profile work, but there are millions of others of changes that have been led at service level. And really, like I say, most of our work is based on trying to support those people to improve quality. So very quickly, we've got some education and training available that people can access. We noticed that that's not the end of the story, it's the start of a conversation really coming on that course. And we hope to keep in touch with as many people afterwards as possible. So we've got what we call a QIQ Champions Network, and we meet about every 8 weeks, and people bring along to those sessions things that they're really struggling with, because they've got back to the day job and it's not always as easy as it sounded on the course. So we work through a lot of those things as a group, and we often find there's common themes that come out of those sessions. So we're learning with each other. We've got sharing events now where we try to encourage people to come and present their work. And overwhelmingly people say to us after those events, oh, there's so many things, Victoria, in that event that I could use in my service and I would not have known about them had I not come along. So people are sort of making connections and taking ideas back. And just as a little plug, the next one is on the 14th of June next year. sector to have in your minds if you're here at Homerton. So that's all from me. I'm not going to take any questions now.